There's something to be said for those reliable developers that maybe aren't producing the biggest AAA bangers, so to speak, but consistently release solid, technically impressive games. Such is the case with Next Level Games and its latest release, Mario Strikers Battle League, which it developed in tandem with Nintendo's EPD division. And it's an interesting release as it's a return to the series that helped forge the studio's relationship with Nintendo in the first place, but also a fantastic and fun football game that caters more towards fans of, say, NBA Jam rather than FIFA Soccer. It's arcade-style action and one that crucially aims for smooth performance and sharp image quality at a time when fewer Switch games can seemingly deliver this. So today I wanted to take a moment to reflect back on Next Level Games' accomplishments before diving into the nuts and bolts of Mario Strikers Battle League on the Switch. So let's get started. These days, Next Level is primarily known for their work on Luigi's Mansion, Dark Moon, and more recently, Luigi's Mansion 3. But they got their start in the world of sports games back in the early 2000s with NHL Hitz Pro for Midway. If you didn't already know that Next Level is a Canadian-based developer, well, hopefully this clarifies that. Yeah, there was a time when the world of hockey games was hugely competitive, and this was Midway's rather strong entry. And that's why their next big project after this made a lot of sense. It's another action-driven sports title, but it also began the long relationship they would forge with Nintendo. It was called Super Mario Strikers, and it was released for the Nintendo GameCube late in the console's life, striking a nice balance between arcade-style action with a hint of realism. It is indeed highly reminiscent of their prior game, NHL Hitz Pro. The controls and general flow of the experience is remarkably similar. Mario and sports were certainly nothing new by this point, but Strikers was well received, offering a slick 60 frames per second presentation and responsive multiplayer gameplay. It received a follow-up on Wii 2 years later, but after that, the series basically went into hibernation until this year. Between these games, they would develop plenty of other titles, including a reboot of Punch-Out!, but I think the most technically impressive release is 2019's Luigi's Mansion 3. This is the game that really demonstrated the team's technical chops and was their first release on the Nintendo Switch. And it is without a doubt one of the most visually impressive games on the Switch, offering super crisp image quality, tremendously moody lighting, impressive reflections work, robust physics, amazing real-time cutscenes, and great character models. All of this was delivered at a full 1080p even. And so we arrive at their latest release, Mario Strikers Battle League. As their second Switch title, I was keen to see how the learnings from Luigi's Mansion 3 might play into a very different game like Strikers. So fundamentally, Battle League builds on the original concept. It's a 5 versus 5 game of football, 4 characters per side duking it out on the pitch with goalies posted on either end. The scale of the field is reduced compared to a more realistic football sim, ensuring that players always have full view of the action while pushing up the pace of each match. In addition, characters have special moves, there's items on the field, and all kinds of other crazy things that really amplify the speed of each match. And if you have enough Joy-Con, it's possible to play Battle League locally with up to 8 players, which unfortunately I could not test owing to the lack of available people and controllers, but I found it tantalizing from a conceptual standpoint. 8-player local multiplayer isn't exactly a common thing, but it's a very nice inclusion. Now, when you first fire up the game, you're treated to a training mode to explain the basics before being dropped into the main menu. It's relatively light on modes, much like prior entries really, but it's enough for an action-driven sports game, I think. But once the action kicks off, we're finally treated to Next Level's latest technological accomplishments. Right away, you'll notice that they've opted once again for a Full HD 1080p presentation in docked mode. Anti-aliasing is absent, as is common with Nintendo releases, but it's still surprisingly sharp and clean for a late-generation Switch game like this, especially one targeting a higher frame rate. Portable mode then comes in at 720p. So, when displaying a game like this, there are several key visual elements that are critical. The rendering of the stadium and environment around it, the actual pitch surface or grass itself, and the characters. So the environments in this game feature some really creative ideas for one. Essentially, the matches are played in space, and the stadiums essentially consist of two entirely different environments smashed together. This increases the amount of data needed to be loaded when starting a match, but it produces some rather impressive results. So the introductory and event sequences are the closest analog to what we saw in Luigi's Mansion 3 in terms of rendering. The characters are displayed with maximum detail, with self-shadowing, highlights that play off their silhouette, and post-processing effects such as depth of field behind them. These sequences also give us a closer look at the pitch itself. A shell texture layer is used to give the illusion of actual blades of grass. Donkey Kong's fur receives a similar treatment. Now, this is nothing new in games, of course, but the implementation here is excellent, as it was in Luigi's Mansion 3. The camera sweeps also reveal some nice background detail. The crowds, for instance, are fully 3D, though they are updated at half rate, so they don't look quite as smooth as the rest of the game. Curiously, we saw 3D crowds similar to this dating all the way back to NHL Hits Pro, though obviously the fidelity has improved since then. We also see some old school render to texture feature on the Jumbotrons mirroring the playfield. While there's no revolutionary new rendering techniques in play here, there is a real purpose in how these features are used to create a beautiful final image. What is impressive and new for the series though are these sequences. When you pull off a special shot, the game pauses briefly to cut to an animated sequence, which brings the game's key artwork to life within the game itself in real time. Rather than simply drawing thick black lines around the character, as is typical of cel-shaded games, the border around the characters is animated, giving it this sketched appearance and motion that's surprisingly effective. In fact, it looks so good I wouldn't mind seeing an actual game utilize this technique during gameplay. But that's just these sequences. What about the game itself? Well, once you drop onto the field, the camera pulls out off to the sidelines, but it's just close enough to the action to retain visible detail, with things like the field's shell texture still being visible despite the camera distance. It's a lot better than simply having a flat textured field. Now, projected shadows are visible across the scene, including from characters themselves, but the self-shadowing that you see in the cutscenes is disabled during actual gameplay to save on resources, no doubt. Compared to prior Strikers games though, I feel as if this new entry is simply more visually attractive overall, with brighter colors and vibrant stadiums. Some of the areas in the original games were kind of drab, I have to admit. All of the action is backed by exceptionally smooth animation work that brings both the characters to life while also injecting the world with more personality. So again, to reiterate, while Mario Strikers doesn't exactly push the technical envelope, the team has done a remarkable job nailing exactly what they set out to achieve, and we're left with an absolutely beautiful game to behold. It's honestly one of the better looking games I've seen on Switch in quite some time. They also took things one step further in terms of audio, as this game does support full 5.1 surround sound. And this is becoming an increasingly uncommon feature in Switch games these days, with many releases only supporting stereo output. But Next Level does offer the full surround sound support, which I think is critical for a sports game like this. Hearing the sound of the crowd play out in the rear channels adds a lot to the atmosphere in a sports game. But of course, now we need to talk about the game's performance, and there's really two aspects here to discuss: in-game performance and cutscene performance. So, in-game, Strikers targets 60 frames per second, and by and large it delivers this with little issue. Even when the action heats up, the frame rate remains remarkably steady and image quality retains its full 1080p output. That means we're basically looking at a proper 1080p 60 game on the Switch, which, like surround sound, isn't exactly commonplace these days. And this fluid frame rate is maintained in both docked mode and handheld mode, though with the pre-release nature of this review, I wasn't able to load it on my portable capture Switch, so we're only able to show docked performance metrics in this test. It's not 100% perfect though. Certain moves do actually cause the frame rate to dip around 50 FPS, but this is just during these sequences and not during normal play. But there's another side of the coin here, the cutscenes. So basically anytime the camera shows close-up shots of characters, including replays and the cinematic sequences between matches, the frame rate is halved to 30 frames per second. It's a logical move that allows for improved rendering quality, but there is a minor issue here. The frame pacing is inconsistent. As a result, there is more visible judder in these scenes than you'd normally expect in a game like this, and not just judder, the frame rate can actually slip below 30 frames per second as well, suggesting that these moments are indeed rather heavy on the Switch's GPU. Ultimately, I would say it's not a big deal since this only occurs during the non-interactive sequences, but it would be nice to see this sorted out as possible. But as far as performance goes overall, I think they've done a great job here with 60 frames per second gameplay dominating the experience. And other than these minor quibbles here and there, Mario Strikers is extremely polished on Switch. It's the best looking entry in the series to date, it plays like a dream, and stands as another great release for Next Level Games, who now has a very strong track record overall, I'd say. Given that their games have taken roughly 3 years to complete though, I'd say that Mario Strikers might be the last normal Switch game they make, unless the Switch generation goes on for longer than anticipated, of course. No matter which platform comes next, however, I'll certainly be interested in seeing where Next Level Games goes from here. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed what you saw, and if you did, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us over on Twitter. And we'll see you next time.